truth with fire in our eyes, through shadows thick where the hidden lies. With blades of might we cut through the haze. The liars tremble beneath our righteous gaze. Knights of the storm, we will rise tonight. Pick up our swords to join the fight. Our blades are sharp and our armor tight. Knights of the storm, we will rise tonight. Whispers in halls where the secrets were grown, exposing lies where dark seeds are sown. Armored in courage, hearts forged in pain, we strike the lead and sever their chains. Knights of the storm, we will rise tonight. Pick up our swords to join the fight. Our blades are sharp and our armor tight. Knights of the storm, we will rise tonight. Through the thunder we move unseen, shattering walls where the guilty convene. Our banner is truth, our shield is our light. We wage a war against the endless night. The relentless night. Knights of the storm, we rise and we fight, bearing the truth through the relentless night. Unelected voices crumble and fall, their echoes fade as justice calls. We are the knights of the storm. Knights of the storm. The knights of the storm. Knights of the storm.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Knights of the Storm. Today, I will be your host, Ashley Think Changer Pete, and with me, I have my co-host and fellow knight, that is Karen Carpenter. Hello, Karen. How are you?
Good morning, Ashley, or afternoon, evening, wherever you may be. And we have a special guest. I'm so excited that she decided to join us today.
Yes, we do. We have Deb with us for our episode. Hello, Deb. Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Good to finally be here.
Yes, we are very, very happy to have you. And today we're going to be getting into the origins of MK Ultra. And this is a broad ranging subject. So it's not only the origins, we're going to be talking about testimonials, various instances where this was known to be used. And we are not even 100% sure exactly where it's going to go today. But I'm very, very excited about it. We have a lot of information to bring you. So we are going to get into it shortly. Before we do that, though, I did want to encourage everyone to please like, subscribe, and share. Make sure that you like the show, and your comments help us. We like getting your feedback. Also, feel free to reach out to us with your, comments, questions, concerns, all of that. I want to welcome everybody in the chat. Thank you all so much for being here, and to everyone else who watches after the fact, we appreciate you very much as well. And I also want to encourage you to check out the Knights of the Storm website. Jason has worked really hard on that, so feel free to use that as a resource to find other shows and potentially contact other people and all that good stuff. So thank you to Jason. And Jason is taking some time off with his family, so I think he's watching and maybe with us in the chat. But we miss you today, Jason, and I hope that you're having a nice time. Now, having said that, we are going to go ahead and get into our topic and perhaps start with a little bit of history. But before we do that, I wanted to talk to Karen and Deb and just ask them about when the subject of mind control or MK Ultra came onto your radar, first of all. And second of all, what about this subject is so interesting and impactful to you? And I'm going to go ahead and start with our guest, if you don't mind, Karen.
No problem.
Okay, well, it's hard to pinpoint, but Karen and I talked a little bit couple nights ago, and just recalling some things that actually I experienced when I was in high school, when I was in 10th grade, and they actually did some mind control experiments on us as students and did not even know that this was happening. But they took the little cards, and trying to do telekinesis and just had students go up and try to project what your thoughts were of the shaped cards and actually, when I did this, you had to go up and project your thoughts. And when I happened to do that, it's like more people got things right when I did that, and I also got more answers right. And so I had teachers asking me questions and kind of following me, and I wondered what happened then. And then I kind of just put that memory away, and then just getting into um, some of the topics that I've researched and come across in my discoveries, I went back to that and was thinking they were doing these mind control and trying to seek out these people, even in the schools. And I lived in a tiny town in northern Minnesota. And so there, I don't know, I've always been a researcher digging into these things, but just kind of trying to tie that together with some of the things and the world wars and actually studying more with our kids as homeschool students. We probably learned a lot through that. And so it's been about 2009 to 2013 we started waking up to some of these issues, and a lot of it's just gone from there. So but it's fascinating to just see how the whole world, and with like the COVID situation, how a whole world can be captivated and just taken hold of. And that was rather proven to be a mind control experiment, trauma based. So that's just kind of just a precursor there for me.
Excellent. And I think that's a really good, you make a lot of good points and why this is such an interesting subject and having some personal experience with that. And it's absolutely true that they're recruiting on college campuses and school. And Courtney Turner had even said that she thought there was visit from intelligence at her school as well. So I think that it is a subject that affects us all, and maybe we don't even fully understand in the way fully how that is done. Karen Carpenter, on to you. What about you?
Well, I think probably I first became a little bit aware probably when with talk of Operation Paperclip and soldier programs and the death of Max Spears, Carrie Cassidy, Project Camelot, and some of the interviews that she did. And that would have been for me maybe around 2012, 2013. And then, I had, to me, it was just a very esoteric topic. I knew that Project Paperclip really carried over, and the more I learned, the more I realized that's what we're seeing today is the fruit of Project Paperclip. And of course, I learned more about the way that trauma-based mind control goes back to the Egyptian Book of the Dead from Max Spears, honestly. And I don't hear anybody talk about Max Spears lectures, but I learned a
No.
lot from Max Spears, and he was killed. He could have been a complete, a quote unquote shill, but I learned a lot from Max Spears about these topics and really piques my interest. And so I've been just looking and learning and continuing ever since. I was in dark journalist follow for a long time, and that's one of their main topics, or one of the topics that keeps coming back. And so, and then Deb, my daughter was in GATE. GATE is a huge topic as far as this goes. And Deb, I did find in one of the videos I was prepping for the show, the cards you were talking about.
Right.
That's in a lecture by a survivor named Gray Area Monarch, who has a great playlist. And he did a 4-hour presentation on GATE and those cards that you're
The,
talking
yeah, the
were in
gifted
that
and talented
presentation.
education. Is that the GATE program or
Yes. Yes, and it
right,
goes by many, many names. And
right.
it's just, a potential recruiting program. So I've been aware of it for several years, many years, over a decade, but I had no idea the scope and the
It's deep.
influence
It's very
and how
deep.
we're moving into that from what used to be in the microcosm used on the individual is being used on the macrocosm now.
Right.
And so it's affecting all of us in more ways than we can possibly, I think, understand and grasp at this point.
Yes, I absolutely 100% agree. I think that there's, we've made the connection to COVID, which I definitely consider an operation, a mass exportation of a mind control program. And we saw that we know about individual programs, but there is so much tie in. We know that programs will change their name so that they are more difficult to trace, more difficult to find documentation and things like this. So I have to wonder what operation is currently being run on us. What is the name of that particular operation? But So I first wanted to start off with a little bit of history. So we know that the OSS was working on mind control programming. So this goes back, a lot of this information didn't start coming out until the 70s. It really didn't get on people's radar until that time frame. But that this had been being worked on for quite some time, and that there was an OSS then CIA connection. To these types of operations. And really, this was something that Deb had mentioned earlier, but it was the idea of the Manchurian Candidate. So we had let's see, The Search for the Manchurian Candidate by John Marks. This is a book that is talking about and getting into the subject of mind control. And then we had Operation Mind Control by Walter Board. But originally, the Manchurian Candidate book was a fiction. And the author said, and we all know what that's about, but basically somebody that was able to be activated to commit an assassination, and that this was known as fiction at that time. But then, in short order, these types of things would be used in real life. And essentially, the author of that book said that he had basically been studying Pavlovian training. So he had not heard of this. That's the official story, at least. And that this was how he kind of came up with the idea. And then we saw the intelligence agencies talking about prisoners of war and accusing the Koreans and the Chinese of brainwashing or mind controlling soldiers. That is in dispute, actually. It is said that the United States was the first company or the first use of agencies in order to do this. So the book Operation Mind Control by Walter Boert, and it starts out by saying that what it should in discussion to a New York Times article, which was titled "Drug Tests by CIA Held More Extensive Than Reported in 75." What it should have said is that U.S. develops invisible weapons to enslave mankind. And I think that that's a very good summary of where this, that statement is a good summary of where this started and where it's going. And I think that the main thing that we all know is that there has been very, very little accountability for what would be really the rape of the human mind in order to create slaves, essentially. So, and I know that Deb has been going over some of the history as well. So I want to head to Deb and then to Karen, and we'll take it from there. So, Deb, what do you have to add on the history of this?
Well, like you said, just the start in the Korean War, and there were, like you said, a lot of this is speculation still, but they did say that a lot of this stemmed, from the U.S. rather than from, the enemies and the Koreans and actually the Russians too. They kind of categorize in there, but some of it too. And they said that we were actually using biological weapons, chemical weapons over there, that it was never officially reported, but that was part of it that started. And then they went from there with the, like the mind control and saying that they were placing their prisoners of war back here in the States, and that they were, basically just going to have triggers and, do dastardly deeds. And so they were all worried about that, but they kind of covered a lot of this up under the Cold War, you know, air quotes, it was Cold War, but it still was, very insidious. But a lot of it too with the, with the Nazis and the Project Paperclip and the history of that, I said it was very, just hypocritical of, to have the Nuremberg trials and to send doctor psychiatrists over there. It was Dr. Cameron from Canada that
Mhm.
he was sitting in on these, and then they tried these people, and these people, suffered the consequences. But then people, they said actually the Nazis didn't lose, they just moved to America. They brought Project Paperclip here. And it's very evident. And it, like Karen said, it sounds esoteric. It sounds like those taboo subjects. You don't talk about those. And it's all on the down low, and it makes it sound, unbelievable. But, it's very believable in, like Karen has um, the documents and the people with their testimonies, that everybody says the same thing and the same terms and the same ways and the same methods that they were used, upon these people. They had different missions, but they, it was all believable then at some point. And, they tried to cover this up, but all of the money, the time, the investment that they put into this with like 185 projects and all of the universities
Mhm.
and, the psychiatrists, psychologists grew out of this whole thing. They just had people embedded everywhere. And so, especially the schools, and that's a whole, mind control operation. That's a whole other subject. But just the total hypocrisy of them punishing people for, the wars and in Nazi Germany and all of that was encompassed, but then coming here and bringing it and just bringing it home to us so we can participate, and they can abuse more people under the radar and just call it Cold War. So that's just a little synopsis.
Very good. Okay, Karen, what about you?
I have a few things I could show at this point that Deb and I both sent, if that would work. So you could go ahead and share my screen. I'll see what I can tie in.
You
So
got it.
this is Juliet Engel, who was one of the first children who was actually sold into the MK Ultra program. I've watched many of her interviews. She's written 3 books. She went on to become an MD. She has had an incredible life and mingled with so many of the characters in the present and the past that we talk about with these programs. So this is her. She's just starting her interview with JJ Carroll here, and she's talking about the beginning of the program and her family tie-in and how, and she ties in a lot of these names.
Karen, can you turn that sound up a little bit? It's low.
Okay, let me see. If I can do that.
The volume on the video itself, that may be enough for us to be able to hear it.
Okay.
Program called MK Ultra, and they signed off on this and funded it in 1953, and made Dr. Sidney Gottlieb the director of it. And it employed the techniques of the Nazi scientists. And actually, the MK and MK Ultra, everybody thinks it's mind control. It's not. It's mind comp. This is the continuation of the Nazi mind control experimentations with the actual scientists that were doing them. So very often in the program, there were the each of the facilities would have a Dr. Green, a Dr. White, a Dr. Brown, Nanny Blacks. The Dr. Greens all had accents. I don't know what they were. I was a kid, but it was very clearly the continuation of that program, and people in the NSA, CIA, OSS put their children in it. So.
Now, ma'am, when you say your father sold you, can you explain that?
Well, my father took me to 6 years old. We went to the park was in Seattle. So he took me to Seward Park, which is this park along Lake Washington. And we met up with someone he called the bosun. It was someone he'd known from the Navy. And the bosun gave me a bottle of Coca-Cola. I'd never had one before. So I drank it all and then got very weak and dizzy and woke up later tied to a bed, face down, smothering, just why I woke up. Nice stinky black silky sheets and spread out on the bed, unable to move and hardly able to breathe. But my father and this man, who then he was calling Vito, were standing where I could see them. And so I started screaming for my father, and he said, "Hey, kid, this is what I raised you for." I'll never, that is seared into my memory. And Vito started counting out money into my father's hand. And my father tried to turn away so I couldn't see them. Vito made him stay where it was like right in front.
Okay, so this is her. She said at the beginning, I missed the part at the beginning. She has 5 uncles that were in the OSS. They're very high. They're bloodline. They're McGregors and they're Scottish bloodlines. And so she's the oldest child, and she was put into the program, but she was never, and she describes very vividly the rituals done with her and where they were done, which includes overlap with Dave McGowan's books and his work. Vito is Vito Polakis, who was in Dave McGowan's Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. So she was actually sold at the age of 6 years old to Vito Polakis, who was the leader of the freaks in Laurel Canyon. And she talks in later on, I have her testimony talking about working with Vito, going to these parties in Laurel Canyon and drugging people and setting them up, record executives, musicians, politicians, including governors of California, to be photographed. And she said sometimes it would lead to sex, but sometimes it wouldn't, but it just had to look that way. So this is just the beginning of her testimony, but she does talk about her family went to Germany from America. They were in the military, American military. They were all in the OSS. They worked in the Nuremberg trials, and they brought people back to the United States and helped establish MK Ultra. And the oldest child of each branch of her family was sold into MK Ultra. So that's just a little bit I wanted to tie in right there. And then this is Deb's document, and she's talking about this is talking about the origins of mind control. And it's talking about Deb, maybe you want to talk about it. The OSS was deciding which drug to use to help people open up and make sure they were telling the truth. So this is a Manchurian Candidate document. Do you want to talk about it at all, Deb?
Right. I think my mic was muted there. It said,
oh, okay.
Yes, well, that was interesting, because just doing some of the research and the history and looking at the OSS and then of course all of the other sub alphabet agencies that came from that, they like to just rearrange letters and assign new jobs to these people. But when they were Albert Hoffman, though, the scientist who first synthesized LSD, that was 1938. And he was observing, the hallucinogenic properties and effects of that. But he actually took it himself. He was the first person, he said, to experience an acid trip in 1943. That wasn't the exact terminology, but so that was one of the things. And that was in Basel, Switzerland, that this started before, they brought all the people over here. But they had many people that they tried the LSD on. Allen Ginsberg, the poets, and actually, who was it? The people from the Grateful Dead, and was it Kevin
Jerry
Kesey?
Garcia, Bob
Garcia,
Weir.
yeah, the whole Grateful Dead was involved in this, and that's how it ties a lot into this music industry, Laurel Canyon, and how they use the mind control through the music. It's actually like familiar spirits, when you talk about that, that's where it works through these components in drugs and psycho effects of that. But and also Kevin Kesey wrote the One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, that actually is
Yes.
basically a true story based on true events that happened to these people. But then in some of the research, when they were using the LSD, because this Hoffman, the way they discovered it just by accident, that just touching a tiny grain of this would set you off. It could be just for days, and just horrible effects of this. They said, we can't just have everybody, going over the edge the first time that they're going to try to use this, because people are so incoherent and vomiting and throwing up, these drugs that they were giving them, because they tried it on their own people first, the people who were operatives, agents who they thought were expendable. They always take these people that are less important, they feel. But then they did do some research into marijuana, and they
Mhm.
tried to do that first in a liquid form, and they would give that to these unsuspecting agents, and that's where they would. It's like they couldn't, keep it down. They would vomit, and it wasn't a good result. So then somebody had told them, well, the natives use this, and they use it in a, like a vapor form, and they would put it on charcoals or wood, and inhale the smoke, but it couldn't be controlled. So then they actually did more experiments and, back into the liquid component, but then they injected it into regular cigarettes
Mhm.
because they thought they got a lot of that information from the jazz scene and all of these musicians that were, smoking cigarettes. So they put the liquid in those, and they would, repackage these, close them up, and give them to these people that they wanted to. And they found that that was one of the ways that helped them, because people could be more useful for the program and, be more coherent and, just have more lucid experiences and not, suffer the total psychological effects of the
Mhm.
LSD. But
How
so
can I
that's
read
part
a
of it.
little bit of it?
Oh, absolutely. You do whatever.
Okay. Sure. So at DOCAL, the Office of Strategic Services, America's wartime intelligence agency, set up a truth drug committee under Dr. Winfred Overholzer, head of the St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington. The committee quickly tried and rejected mescaline, several barbiturates, scopolamine. Then, during the spring of 1943, a committee decided that cannabis indica, or marijuana, showed the most promise, and it started the testing program in cooperation with the Manhattan Project, the top secret effort to build an atomic bomb. It was not clear why OSS turned to the bomb makers for help, except that, as one former project official put it, our secret is so great, I guess we were safer than anyone else. Apparently, top project leaders who went to incredible lengths to preserve security saw no danger in trying out drugs on their personnel. The Manhattan Project supplies the first dozen test subjects who were asked to swallow concentrated liquid of marijuana. And so they found that it made people vomit, basically. So they went back to the drawing board, and they decided that a way to administer it was through for the jazz musician and others, the cigarettes. So they reported smoking a mix of tobacco with a marijuana essence, the state of irresponsibility causing the subject to be loquacious and free of his impartation of information. So he was imparting a lot of information if you gave them the cigarettes with the cannabis indica injected. And so they kept trying a field tests. They administered the drug by inviting Del Gracio up to his apartment for a smoke and a chat. White had been talking to Del Gracio earlier about securing the mafia's cooperation to keep Axis agents out of the New York waterfront and to prepare a way for the invasion of Sicily. Del Gracio had already made it clear to White that he personally had taken part in killing informers who had squealed to the feds. The gangster was as tough as they can, and if he could be induced to talk under the influence of a truth drug, certainly German prisoners could. So the reasoning went. White plied him with cigarettes until the subject became high and extremely garrulous. Over the next 2 hours, Del Gracio told the federal agents about the ins and outs of the drug trade, revealing information so sensitive that the CIA deleted it from the OSX documents it released 34 years later. I wonder what Whitney Webb would have to say about that. At one point in the conversation, after Del Gracio began to talk, the gangster told White, "Whatever you do, don't ever use any of this stuff I'm telling you." In a subsequent session, White packed the cigarettes with so much marijuana that Del Gracio became unconscious for about an hour. Yet the whole experiment was considered a success in loosening the subject's tongue. And I'll stop there.
Okay, very good. And I want to get back to this and some more clips, but there's a handful of things that I wanted to point out about the perspective of Operation Mind Control. So the objective of mind control during this period has been to take human beings and transform them into unthinking, subconsciously programmed zombies, motivated without their knowledge and against their wills to perform in a variety of ways in which they would not otherwise willingly perform. So I know that we do have that established, but I thought that that was an important quote. And then just a couple more things here before we move on to some of these shares. This is accomplished through the use of the various techniques called various names, including brainwashing, thought reform, behavior modification, hypnosis, and conditioned reflex therapy. So I wanted to point out the fact that sometimes these, the mind control or trying to manage human behavior will be under several different words in the same way that they have programs that have various different names, or it is in one iteration. And like Levi was saying in our chat, originally this was Operation Bluebird, then Operation Artichoke, and then MK Ultra. And this is done for a lot of different reasons to obscure the trail and make it more difficult for people to follow. But we also know that they will use language and linguistic tricks in order to do that as well, to obscure what they're actually doing or to make it sound like it's not the exact same thing. Mind control developed through efforts of individual psychologists, psychiatrists, and chemists working in an isolated conditions under government contracts. Each researcher or research team was allowed to know only what they needed to know to accomplish his or her fragment of research or testing. So I wanted to make sure that I pointed that out because and I'm getting ready to talk about who this is. So we know about the CIA, but like Deb was talking about earlier, this really couldn't have been done without private corporations, without
Mhm.
universities, without a lot of other people, these contractors, in addition to intelligentsia. So the author, excuse me, of oh, Operation Mind Control, sorry. He began his research believing in the cult of intelligence that was behind the mind control program. No single originating force, but several. The operation is too widespread and complex for it to be a cult. But originally he was thinking cult, right? Then he said that if a cult there must be, then it is a cult within a cult in an interlocking chain of invisible many governments with unwritten rules, unwritten plans, and unwritten loyalties. It is a plan of secret bureaucracy, what I call a cryptocracy, which conspires against our laws and freedoms. And I think that that is so important because this is not only what we know about what was used here in the United States, but this has been used abroad in many, many, many different iterations. And bear with me, I apologize for all the reading, but I'm almost done here. So the CIA near the top of the intelligence program has been drawing most of the fire. And this is something I wanted to also point out because often we talk about MK Ultra and we talk about the CIA, but I just want to stress that it is so much more involved than that. So the CIA has been drawing most of the fire. Evidence of cryptocracy clearly implicates NSA, Defense Intelligence Agency, and subsidiaries in military intelligence as well as civil service. Alliance extends to private contractors, institutions, and religious organizations, like what Deb was saying. And then, even though the CIA is the vanguard, the cryptocracy is composed of the Office of Naval Intelligence, Army Intelligence, Air Force Intelligence, Department of Justice, Department of Health, Education and Welfare, Bureau of Prisons. That is very important because
Mhm.
this can tie into what Karen wants to talk about the Laurel Canyon. And that is very applicable, obviously, to Jolly on West, to potentially the Manson murders, what Manson experienced, and Dana Duda has also tied in a lot of this to prison ministry or prison outreach. So the Bureau of Prisons is really important here. Bureau of Narcotics, Atomic Energy Commission, Veterans Administration, General Services Administration, National and Science Foundation, American corporations, excuse me, especially airlines, oil companies, and aerospace companies. which I also think is highly important. And then the last card here that I have is the CIA was a major funder of mind control research. Virtually every major government agency became knowingly or unwittingly involved. So back to what he was saying, it's really not necessarily one single origin, but if there is a cult within a cult, then we look to Key Bono to this day, who benefits, and we know who benefits in a million different ways. Okay, so Karen and Deb, before we get into another share, what are your thoughts on that as far as the other parts of the government, parts of the contractors, parts university education, all of the prisons, all of these other institutions being involved in moving towards controlling human behavior?
Well, I have a list that Deb shared here, and I have Juliet Engel's testimony on this exact topic, as well as Gray Area Monarchs talk on the, and Coco Cyan Ryder's testimony on the same topics. Clearly, this is pervasive. It's pervasive through all areas of society. It's a control mechanism, and it's been kind of on the down low in so many ways, but I think that we're seeing it moving into an overt system now. The control mechanism is completely changing. But this is a list of the 149 MK Ultra sub projects that Deb shared with me, and Juliet Engel also mentions these. So if we just take a look through these quickly. This is in 1953-54. Isolate and characterize the alkaloids of Imopia, Sedalia, Choisy, Revea, Corrybosa, which is sounds like some kind of a microorganism to me. And this was going to be done at Princeton. And I think that poisoning and psychedelic effects and drugging, is one of the main topics that we see over and over again. Miscellaneous research and testing and behavioral modification at Stanford University, 1953 to 58, with Robert Lashbook. This is the CIA Manual of Trickery and Deception. John Mulholland, which is Mulholland Drive. I talked about this with Deb. In Laurel Canyon, I believe that one of the main boulevards is Laurel Boulevard, but also Mulholland Boulevard. And I remember Johnny Carson used to talk about Mulholland Boulevard in Burbank and in the Disneyland area. So John Mulholland here, he was the contractor. And this CIA monitors were Sidley Gottlieb and Robert Lashbook, and two people whose names are redacted. The CIA Manual of Trickery and Deception. And so we just see so many in so many different places. University of Minnesota, University of Denver, successful demonstration of potentialities of hypnosis as a clandestine tool. We've got the LSD in 52 to 56. Doesn't say where it is. Location top secret. So we've got just so many more that we could go through here. But as you're saying, it is very pervasive, and this is going back. This is 75 years ago that these programs were happening. So Deb, what are your thoughts?
Well, I know that we talked about especially John Mulholland the other night, and like I said, this was an official CIA manual of trickery and deception, and they actually, declassified, but they do still redact things, and then there's a lot of broken links that you try to go to, so it's still kind of a hunt and peck and a, rabbit hole search. But it had MK Ultra sub projects 4, 15, 19, and they just determined, this Mulholland, who was actually started out in New York City as, prestidigitator, magician, but they used magician's arts that were useful in covert operations, and he was actually kind of a student and friend of Harry Houdini.
Oh, right.
Right. And that is something that I was really surprised about, because I just found that out this, past week, and that was very telling. But, it's like, it's always, the hand is quicker than the eye, and these people are actually, it is just deception, magic, but they do use those. And Harry Houdini, I guess also, he was in the Laurel Canyon scene, with Charles Manson and all these people.
Yes.
So they tie everything, like Ashley said, it's so deep, it's so connected, it's such a web. It is a worldwide web of deception and It's just that we are the losers, the subjects worldwide in this, because when you mentioned, Coco Ryder, who she is the granddaughter of Donovan, the folk
Mhm.
music, folk artist, and a talented gal, like arts and things that she used.
Yes.
But when she talked about that, she said, I didn't totally grow up there, but I spent time there later, and then ended up being, like a targeted individual and
Mhm.
followed by the men in black and people, and they were messing with her mind and, breaking into her apartment and her homes, and, just being threatened because she just started asking questions. And it was basically, this was the Illuminati and the Masonic connections that tied
Mhm.
into a lot that she started noticing. But she did say, and this was very telling about, it was a trauma-based mind control operation, the COVID. She said it was the satanic ritual abuse and the circles, the 6 foot distancing, all of the, the masks and the, humiliation rituals and the control that was worldwide. She said this whole thing was an experiment to see how far they could go, that if this component worked, that they know that they can try it again in some of their operation, in something that, is even worse. And we know that it's not the end of that, little season
Right.
of mind control here, because I knew exactly when this happened that there was something wrong, because it was worldwide. So I mean, like Ashley said, it's deep, it's connected, there are so many facets, and it couldn't happen without everybody being in it together, and not for the better.
Yeah, and I just want to chime in that not only that, it is with impunity, is the people who have the opportunity, who have the monopoly on research funding, the people who have the monopoly or the corruption that is collaborating within the lack of the justice system to hold these people accountable and to allow them to commit atrocities and war crimes all over the world. And it's obviously important for America. We know that Americans were unwittingly tested on, and they were drugged without their knowledge or consent. And we know that this subject ties in to child trafficking, which we can get into a little bit more whenever we talk about Laurel Canyon, Dave McGowan, and then obviously Program to Kill, one of his most important books, or the most important book, The Politics of Serial Murder. But this also ties in once again with the military industrial complex. A lot of these people have military connections. They have psychological psychological hospital connections in some cases. And these military operations uh, have been used worldwide. So one of the most famous operations that is talked about in this space is, or in the like truth community, is Operation Gladio, and a strategy of tension, and the fact of Operation Gladio being brought back home, and that we're still seeing many of these events to this day, which ties in again with Dave McGowan, with the politics of serial murder, because that created a tense environment of people having this sense that you could just be murdered by a serial killer at any time. And then that was being overseen by William Colby, director of the CIA. Then once we move past World War II and we're moving into Vietnam, and these things are actually happening concurrently, William Colby was overseeing Operation Phoenix, which was an operation of terror and absolute atrocity and human abuses perpetrated on the Vietnam people. So it goes on and on and on and on and on. And just to say that it is so interconnected. It is this woven web, and it is perpetrated on people globally in a million different ways. And this, and we can tie back in and show the video that Karen has pulled up of a survivor. But this was the types of experiments that were done were extensive. It wasn't all, sexual trauma, even though that was a huge piece of it, but it's just so wide ranging. And I know, we have a very smart chat and very smart host here today. So I know that's probably obvious, and we've got people giving us a lot of really good information and feedback. So I know that people are aware of this, but just wanted to chime that in.
Colonel Towner Watson is just got a fantastic Rumble channel about Gladio, Operation Gladio, and she just goes through the history and country by country, event by event. I could spend months soaking up her information on Gladio. She's just fantastic. And it's called the Colonel's Corner. And yes, William Colby said, we know our information campaign will be complete when everything the American public believes is untrue. So I think that pretty well wraps it up, saying, that our disinformation will be complete when everything you believe is false. So this is Coco that Deb was talking about. Just a quick, she's only done 2 videos, I believe, so far. She's had she did one with Gareth Ike just recently. This is the first one she's ever done. She's starting a YouTube. Her grandfather is Donovan, who was also Scottish. The Scottish bloodlines seem to tie in a lot with this. And these people always do, or quite often do, point to the fact that this is definitely a bloodline phenomenon in many ways. Intelligence operations, yes, intelligence agencies, and bloodlines. And they really seem to tie in together with this. So her grandfather was Donovan. Her uncle was Brian Jones' son by adoption, by marriage. And then her father is named Sean Ryder, and he was in the Happy Mondays in the UK, which is a big rave band in the 90s. I guess she says that the members of the band used to throw out boxes of ecstasy to the crowd. So I just wanted to play just a little bit of her testimony about Laurel Canyon and about COVID. Just a couple minutes. Oops.
So the MK Ultra is part of the Monarch program. Okay.
So he's got that backwards.
There's a lot of other things to it, but like I know you're familiar with MK Ultra, and like that's under the umbrella of Monarch.
It's supposed to be an undetectable kind of mind control where they do it. A lot of them want to talk about it, but we're all too afraid to talk about it. So where was I? I was talking about Monarch. You guys know about Monarch.
I was familiar with Laurel.
Sorry, I'm trying to get it to the right spot.
Well, okay.
So the MK Ultra is part of the Monarch program.
Okay, that I was familiar with. Yeah.
There's a lot of other things to it, but like I know you're familiar with MK Ultra, and like that's under the umbrella of Monarch, from what I understand.
Right, so MK Ultra came first, Monarch came second. Monarch is a type of trauma-based mind control where it's supposed to be an undetectable kind of mind control where they do it on these people. And a lot of the celebrities that you see today are all Monarch children. So they basically put them through various traumas when they're very young and split their mind. And it's not necessarily about creating split personalities. If you can achieve that, great for them. It's not necessarily about that. It's more about dissociative capacities and how that can be useful for them. So with Monarch programming, there's various themes. So you've got like Alice in Wonderland and Wizard of Oz and stuff like this. And this is all, you can Google this. It's all very well, it used to be. Google has become quite useless in the last few years. So I went through the Wizard of Oz Monarch programming, where I can only imagine I was kidnapped as a child and given drugs and put through various strange situations. In Laurel Canyon specifically, there is a house which Jared Leto bought and has recently sold, which had a bunker underneath where the CIA used to film secret propaganda movies. And this is just something that's out in the open, but they have a lot of these facilities where they have secret like places to do film sets, and they have all of these props and they set up all of these things, and then they put children on drugs and then they traumatize them, and they send them into these rooms with all of these strange and surreal things around. And fuck with their head, basically. And I'm not supposed to remember any of these things. You know,
Yeah.
I'm not supposed to
Okay.
have any memory of these things. I'm not supposed to know any of the things that I know.
And then the COVID was at 107.34, where she talks about COVID.
Scott, there are occultists in the background who are doing either ceremonies, rituals, but I would say more like going into a trance and going into the astral realm and working with the various beings and entities that exist within the astral realm. And I would just assume, it's a guess, I'm guessing, that during these concerts like this, they are opening people's astral bodies. And
She's talking about Travis Scott and other concerts.
the influence of various beings, entities. They could even be, so within the astral realm, you got to imagine it's populated by billions of different species, and you have.
I thought this is where she talked about COVID. Oh boy.
You might have beings that look and behave a lot like the beings that we have in the water, in the ocean.
I can't. I'm sorry. We can move on. I thought that was where she talked about COVID.
That's okay.
She talked about COVID being a global operation.
Yeah, if you want to try that again or listen to it, I wanted to go to Deb and get Deb's thoughts on some of these, the first part of this video, as well as some of the other stuff that we mentioned. I want to make sure that you have, that you are able to get some input as well on these subjects, Deb. So what do you think?
Well, I actually did listen to this video, and I really didn't know about Coco Ryder until Karen had mentioned that when we were texting. And just, it's fascinating, all the different people, but the things that she brings into it, where it is occult, it is satanic ritual abuse, it is, they refer to Illuminati, New World Order. It sounds, tinfoil hat conspiracy theory, but it's real. These things are real. And they aren't messing around. And that she experienced these, and she was actually fearful of these things. But just like she said, you do have these bloodline connections, and it is because they want to keep these people pure. And it comes back to when she's talking about all these astral planes and the physical, and it is energy. They're sucking energy, they're harvesting the energy off people, and basically that's why they do a lot of these things. And we've researched that basically we're human batteries, and they can use your DNA. It's more powerful. You're just on a hamster wheel and going along, collecting your social credit scores while you're, providing power for their, their agenda. And so it was very enlightening, and I don't always agree with things, that because a lot of it goes into the new age, but some of these things have been hijacked, and there are truths in these. But she talks about, you are an energetic being, and you can ground, and just the history of this goes back. I think we touched on it a little bit when I talked to Karen about the the lies of our history and what buildings were used for, and like cathedrals, and those were like energy healing centers, and had cathodes and diodes and cymatic windows. And it sounds a little far out there, but these things are true. And then those were taken over by religious institutions, and well, now it's a church, and we're gonna charge you alms, and do your penance, and we're going to have our whole made up history here. So I mean, that's where these rabbit holes, it's like you have to choose which one. It's like you go down one, and it just keeps going. It's so deep. But I was so impressed that she did tie this into the trauma-based mind control worldwide. And they've had it planned. It wasn't just something that, oh, this happened, there's a virus, and now we're all doomed. It's been in the works, and it's been part of the program. And it's just really interesting how all these the people, like she said, I had the Wizard of Oz programming, the Over the Rainbow, it's like Alice in Wonderland. They all a lot ties into the Disney and the NASA.
Yes.
And all of these different components, but these are not nice places. And it's like, it's not the happiest place on earth. And, getting back to that Disney component where they would take people and, I think that was J.R. Sweet would say that they would,
Yes.
take these children under the rides. They have a whole tunnel system. They would perform rituals and sexual abuse. They would film, pornography under there, and it's just hideous. It's absolutely, mind boggling, speaking of the mind, but it's something that they tie all of these things in. And like we said, it couldn't work without, with all of these pieces.
And Ashley, can I throw a little bit in? Juliet Engel, she describes in detail what was done under Disneyland with her. She was used in snuff films with children, also in Lookout Mountain, and also under Disneyland. She describes it in detail. The groups of children. And this plays in with the world agenda. She says there were groups of children. She was in a group of white children that were elite. And then there were Mexican children. And she was one of the elites and happened to be white. Of course, there are elites of other colors. But in her group, and there was the white children, the white elites. And then there were the Mexican children were brought in. And the Mexican children were killed. And she refused to kill them. So she suffered for that. And so she talks about all, and they were used in snuff films. And so she talks about all of those things and how Disneyland plays into it. She in detail describes compromising somebody, being taken to Disneyland hungry. And if she wanted to eat, she had to lure a man onto Toad's Wild Ride. And when the train was approaching, which is the camera, she had to get her hands in certain places, or make the daddy get his hands in certain places on her to get a picture taken in order to eat. So she describes all of these things, but she also does talk about how decades ago, when this would have been in the 50s, 60s, 70s for her, they were being told that there were going to be riots and there would be genocides. Certain ethnic groups would be genocided. So absolutely, this has been a plan, and it's been for quite some time.
One thing I'm just gonna say too about her, that they took her to Mexico when they were little, and she said that they would just treat them like savages, that they would take their clothes, bring them to the beach, and they would run around. And she said they wouldn't bathe for weeks, and they wouldn't have food, and just the trauma of that she was recalling through these things. And then she started writing books about the different personalities that she had, and getting these things out and getting people to believe them was some of the hardest things. And trying to live a normal life. These people got married, had children, but a lot of the times these were arranged marriages. And I found that with, I think it was Bryce Taylor. It's like her husband, it's like he was also controlled, but then they were married, and then he was her handler, and she lost her her children, and her daughter was also in these programs, and now she's in a mental institution in a catatonic state. So it keeps going. And they had to actually bring their children to these military bases, to these ritual abuse destinations, and take part in their controlling too. And it's they just try to tie everything in. And one thing that people don't know is that they have triggers like the suicide triggers. So it just depends on, if I start thinking of something, or if I start remembering, do this, jump out a window, jump out, kill yourself, or walk in front of a car. And these things, it's something different if they start. Or I'm supposed to call this number if I start remembering, so somebody can come pick me up. And that ties into like the Frank Olson assassination. And that is a whole other, category. But basically, this gentleman was involved like in World War II, Fort Detrick. He was in aerosolizing the biological agents that were used as munitions. And he was, finding ways to use these, kind of like James Bond. It's like, we're going to put this in a, hairspray can, or we're going to use, certain little, everyday things to, activate these. And, that tied in with, in San Francisco, they did the Operation Sea Spray, and Fort Terry and Plum Island. They just had delivery devices for these agents. And, they tried to stop these with Geneva Conventions, but they were violating these forever. It's like, we are not good at keeping our our word or promises to the world. We just kind of, reap and rape and move on. So just some of those were some other things that go down another whole topic.
That's one of the things that Juliet Engel talks a lot about is the suicide programming and how she overcame that through drawing and seeing a therapist who had known her for quite some time. And so she does talk about the suicide programming and how that when you do start to remember things, you have to make sure that you hold space for yourself to remember slowly. And then a lot of the different survivors that we've listened to do talk about that suicide programming. And that's something that Dave McGowan talked about a lot too, is the unbelievable amount of suicides amongst the parents of the players in Laurel Canyon, as far as the musicians and the Young Turks, the actors. The number of suicides amongst their parents was just incredible. And of course, their parents had tie-ins with military and intelligence. And the number of their parents that were suicide victims was incredible, was really of note. And of course, we know about the 27 Club and so many of the even currently musicians and actors and things that we know have accidents or have, quote unquote suicide. So that it makes you wonder if that's a possibility that some of these suicide programs are being uncovered within their psyches. Ashley.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in on that because, first of all, I want to give some legitimacy to these stories that we're talking about. So, if you are somebody who is skeptical of the fact that this happens or skeptical of the stories of the survivor, of people who are relaying this information to you, I just wanted to say that this has been studied by people in academia as well. This is not just people getting on some YouTube channel making content. So one book that I want to point out, and I've talked about this before, is called Ritual Abuse in the 21st Century: Psychological, Forensic, Social, and Political Implications. And that is by author Randy Noblet and Pamela Perskins Noblet, his wife. And there is in this book, what they talk about is this from an academic perspective, and they try to get scientific as they can. So essentially, it is several kind of essays or inputs from different people who are studying this subject from different angles. And one of the ways that they tried to get scientific about this was that they began recruiting people who believed that they had experienced it was either kind of on a scale. So the people that had experienced what is referred to as ritual abuse or like satanic ritual abuse, the people that were involved in government experiments, and other people that had just had horrific abuse. And so they created a survey. They worked together, collaborated with other people in the field in order to do this, and they tried to get it out to as many people as possible. So there are some allowances for people trying to mess with or meddle with the results of the study, but they did put measures in place in order to try to prevent that. They tried to have a very secure website, and they tried to have broad ranging questions and kind of on the scale in a survey that people were able to answer. So a lot of conclusions were drawn. I mean, I'm not even all the way through the book. Like, there's a lot of information here. But one of the things is that a lot of these people who have experienced this type of abuse, the satanic ritual abuse, and mind control programming, they have there are several assessments that can be done to determine if they are different than someone else who's experiencing mental hardship. So a lot of times you will see a conflation of people with dissociative identity disorder or schizophrenia. If they will call them schizophrenic, but we need to be really careful about that now that we know, because they are not the same thing. They and if you have a psychologist or psychiatrist who is well trained, but they need to know about this, but they can discern. There are several different evaluations and surveys that they can do with their patients to make a determination of if this person has dissociative identity disorder as a result of horrific physical, sexual, and psychic abuse versus someone who has schizophrenia. Now, there can be an overlap there, but that they are two different issues. So, so basically, in saying all of that, I just wanted to convey that there is discernible differences and there is evidence and documentation that this is real. These people's symptoms are real. And what Karen and Deb were talking about as far as these triggers that can be made for this person to want to kill themselves or harm themselves, this is because of because of everything that they figured out, but advanced hypnosis techniques. So we know that one of the founders of these programs was George Estabrooks, and he was considered to be an expert in hypnosis. And he believed that he could do what we are talking about here, which is that he could make hypnotized assassins, that he could do memory implants. This is something that's also associated with Jolyon West, is that basically people can have false memories implanted into them. Now, I want to say that there's a lot of controversy around false memories and the false memory syndrome, and a lot of the people who are founders of the false memory syndrome, they were there to essentially take away the legitimacy of the people who were talking about their experiences, and a lot of them ended up being accused of hurting their own children. So I just wanted to say that. But back to Estabrooks, that he could wipe people's memories and that essentially cause them to have worldview destruction that would make them go crazy. And I wanted to go over another quote from the book that I was talking about earlier, Operation Mind Control. Sorry, I keep forgetting that. Vietnam vets who had been conditioned in the black science of the war of torture, terror, and technology were debriefed with special attention. Their memories were so completely erased before they were returned to civilian life with only the minimum fragmented knowledge of who they were and what they had done. And this was noted as being different from a regular grunt coming back from Vietnam. So they were described as having post-Vietnam syndrome. And so there was a concerted effort to make some of these people that were involved in these special operations in Vietnam to not be able to remember what had happened. So all of these things, the reason I'm laying them out is because I want to add legitimacy to what we're talking about when we hear survivors' stories. And that very scenario that Karen and Deb were talking about, by these people who were essentially masters of being able to fracture the human psyche. And they figured out that the ages that it is easier and better to do, which is why we see a lot of children. That is because it is very easy to start for these mind controllers and these hypnotists to break and create and fracture not only the personalities. So you can have like the main or the master personality who is not aware of all of these other personalities or what they have been programmed to do, but they can create rooms and walls and things like this in order to compartmentalize and make it very difficult for people to know or remember what happened to them. And that also includes scaring them or implanting the idea that something is actually implanted in them. So if you remember, yes, you were going to want to kill yourself. And then the other thing that I wanted to add to what Deb was talking about is the people that, or maybe Karen, sorry, the people that have been helped. So there is a certain amount of therapy and therapies that in this survey in ritual abuse in the 21st century that were known to be more helpful. So number one for these people was being believed. The other thing they could have programmed into them is some weird stories or weird details that are put there intentionally. So when they do try to communicate this to other people, they do sound crazy to make it easier to disbelieve them. So I just wanted to add that little tidbit in there that this has been studied and provide legitimacy to what we're talking about here.
Okay, this is some testimony that was offered in March of 1985 before U.S. Mind Control's committee. And this is a woman who was actually a therapist, and she said she had 2 weeks to prepare, and she had over 40 other therapists contact her about patients they had that had experienced these types of phenomenon. And it says radiation experiments, but they're very much experiments with MK Ultra and mind control. So and it's gray, which is gray. This is gray area. Let's see here. I'm on the wrong one. Gray here. He's done 4-hour presentations on splitting the mind, the different pathways, all of the different ways to create the rooms and the files and the walls and the different daytime versus nighttime, all the different personalities, all the different file folders, the keywords, how to deprogram, how to find a safe therapist. He's done fantastic, absolutely fantastic real work, in the current day. And he's on X. He has a website. I think it's a great resource for anybody who may have questions. But this is a program he did, a 4-hour program, going through all of the different ways that people are programmed, and he goes through Bill Donovan's work and the different it's just amazing the amount of work that he does, so that you can find through him through Gray Area Monarch. So this is some testimony that he recommends. I'll just play a little bit. This is the therapist. Oops, I'm hitting on the wrong one. Let's see if it'll play. So Claudia Mullen is one of the people who testifies, and Chris DiNicola Ebner. This is President Clinton's Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments, which is, I find, ironic.
It all sounds really familiar. I'm here to talk about a possible link between
oh my goodness, what
experimentation that began in the late 1940s. The main reason that mind control research is being mentioned is because people are alleging that they were exposed as children to mind control, radiation, drugs, and chemical experimentation, which were administered by the same doctors who are known to have been involved in conducting both radiation and mind control research. Written documentation has been provided revealing the names of people, the names of research projects, and statements from people across the country. It is also important to understand that mind control techniques and follow-ups into adulthood may have been used to intimidate these particular research subjects into not talking about their victimization in government research. As a therapist for the past 22 years, I have specialized in treating victims and perpetrators of trauma and their families. When word got out that I was appearing at this hearing, nearly 40 therapists across the country, and I had about a week and a half to prepare, contacted me to talk about clients who had reported being subjects in radiation and mind control experiments. The consistency of people's stories about the purpose of the mind control and pain induction techniques such as electric shock, use of hallucinogens, sensory deprivation, hypnosis, dislocation of limbs, and sexual abuse is remarkable. There is almost nothing published on this aspect of mind control used with children, and these clients come from all over the country, having had no contact with each other. What was startling was that therapists reported many of these clients were also physically ill with autoimmune problems, thyroid problems, multiple sclerosis, and other muscle and connective tissue diseases, as well as mysterious ailments for which a diagnosis cannot be found. While somatization disorder is commonly found in these clients, many of the clients who've been involved in the human experimentation with the government have multiple medically documented physical ailments. And I was really shocked today to hear one of the speakers talk about the cysts and the teeth breaking off, because I have a client that's happening to. Many people are afraid to tell their doctors their histories as mind control subjects for fear of being considered to be crazy. These clients have named some of the same people, particularly a Dr. Green, who was associated with clients' reports of childhood induction of pain.
Dr. Mingle S. Green.
person with this same name was the scientific director of the Chemical and Radiological Laboratories at the Army Chemical Center, and that he was engaged in doing research for the Army and other intelligence agencies. Other names that have come to light are Dr. Sidney Gottlieb and Dr. Martin Orn, who it is reported were also involved in radiation research. It needs to be made clear that people have remembered these names and events spontaneously, with free recall, and without the use of any memory retrieval techniques such as hypnosis. As much as possible, we have tried to verify the memories with family members, records, and experts in the field. Many attempts have been made through Freedom of Information Act filings to gain access to the mind control research documentation. These requests have generally been slowed down or denied, although some information has been obtained, which suggests that at least some of the information supplied by these clients is true. It is important that we obtain all of the information contained in the CIA and military files to verify or deny our clients' memories. Although many of the files for MK Ultra may have been destroyed, whatever is left, along with the files for other projects, such as Bluebird and Artichoke, to name only two, contain valuable information. Furthermore, if, as the evidence suggests, some of these people were used in radiation experiments, there might be information in the mind control experiment file on radiation experiments. We need this information to help in the rehabilitation and treatment of many people who have severe psychological and medical problems which interfere with their social, emotional, and financial well-being. Finally, I urge you to recommend an investigation into these matters. Although there was a commission on mind control, it did not include experiments on children because most of them were too young or still involved in the research in the late 1970s to come forward. The only way to end the harassment and suffering of these people is to make public what has happened to them in the mind control experiments. Please recommend that there be an investigation and that the files be opened.
Okay, so there's more. There's two women that come forward and also give their testimony the ways that they were tortured, and they were used in MK Ultra also. So that testimony is available on YouTube. It's not hard. It's not easy to find. So if you want to find it, it's the ACHRE Torture Conditioning Testimony 1995. It's about 19 minutes long.
And I wanted to check in with Deb and see what Deb had thought about some of these clips that we've shown and talking about the, just some of the other information that we talked about. What are you thinking, Deb?
Well, one of the things is the trust factor in these victims that can actually go to these therapists. It has to be a big deal for them to open up because everybody in their life has been part of their programming. And, they actually said, and I think it was Bryce Taylor and J.R. Sweet and some of these people, they would always be harassed if they started treatment because they know that they were remembering things. And if the suicide triggers didn't work on them, obviously they didn't because they're speaking out, they would be harassed and then they would harass the therapist. Some therapists withdrew, in their help, but it's a huge trust factor and a danger for these people. And you really wonder, are they trustworthy? Are they giving you good information? So there's always these questions, but like Karen said, a lot of these, like Dr. White was Mengele, or was it Dr. Green? Was it
Dr. Green? But
Dr. Green.
But Juliet Ingalls said no matter where she was being tested or experimented on or programmed, there was always a Dr. Green, always Nanny Blacks. There were always people playing these roles. But I've heard for years that Mengele called himself Dr. Green, but it sounds like there were also people playing those roles in the program.
Right, it was a role, but they said they used the color-coded triggers because there was a Dr. White and there's brown and green, and actually it was a Dr. White who also had like a different code name, and he was part of that Operation Midnight Climax that they did out in San Francisco and Greenwich Village, where they would entrap these people with these sex workers and, film people and do the experiments with the LSD to, they're always documenting things. And that's how they hold this over the heads of these, political people and celebrities, so many of these, but they do have, always something color coded that ties in with that. But, there are just so many things, just like J.R. Sweet, though. And one thing I wanted to mention
Mhm.
that the bringing in the connection to the religious institutions. And that is like the Mormon church was a huge component and how they are tied into this and how, like Ashley said later, you'd get into like the sex trafficking and they came out with their movie like Sound of Freedom, and the Mormon church
Yes.
was big in that, and it's like it's a total lie and cover up. And it's like I tried to tell people from before, but he tells specifically how these Mormon leaders would buy him, control him. They were part of his programming his whole life. And that actually his grandfather was Jim Reeves, is who the
Yes.
character of his grandfather, him. And then like Bryce Taylor, I believe, was it Bob Hope was the person that she was, owned by. These people are physically sold. They are
Yes.
chattel. They are, nothing more than cattle to these people. And it's really sad that people think that. But another one that I looked into was like this, this Candy Jones. It was like the buying of
Oh,
Candy
right.
Jones. She was the pinup girl, like CIA spy, and she was on USO tours. So all these people who people thought, were great entertainers and you could, identify with your whole life as these wholesome people, you know, rather, kind of like the Bill Cosby thing. It's like he was, America's father on the Cosby Show, but you're finding out that these people actually, they say play roles and move on to do something else, but they are so, prevalent in the programming of these people. And it's just absolutely, it's mind boggling. But they,
Mhm.
like this Candy Jones, I see that you have the thing there. She, met
Yes.
this gentleman, Gilbert Jensen, who was a CIA tormentor and handler, and, some of these people, this John Nebel, her second husband, pioneered like a long paranormal focused radio show that later like became the standard fare of hosts like Art Bell and these people, so people, they have these different things, but they used hypnosis, and she was a courier and it was activated by telephone, a cue, different tones. And so she would absolutely just get in a trance. And so her husband, found out that, this would happen to her. So he, with her permission, kind of put her under and found out all of the things that happened to her that she really had no clue. And, her real name, Jessica Arlene Wilcox. And, I think it was like 1925. But it's just, it goes so deep. But it's just like having to trust people to come out to, and just having these people have some semblance of normalcy. But going back to like the Juliet Engel thing, she ties in to like the University of Washington. She went on to, get a degree, become a doctor, have a successful life. She had everything, but, she ended up getting divorced and things didn't work out. But she went to stay on, I believe, an island, up in Washington where they flew people in and she could have done some work for them. And actually, Jeffrey Epstein was one of those people. And it ties back to, here we are with the Epstein files and with all of this, but they're all connected. So it's another thing of the, the web. And oh, what a tangled web we weave when
Yeah.
first we
She
practice to deceive, and they're experts at it. So
she was in Seattle. She went from being under MK Ultra as a owned basically by Vito in California, and she escaped and she got herself, she used her skills, because when you a lot of these mind control victims, they do have great abilities. They may have a photographic mind or great mathematical abilities. So she would use, when she was waiting to go be a honey trap with these record executives and people, she'd bring her math books and she would study on the way. And so she got herself into a medical school, University of Washington, and then she escaped. She got a medical degree. She was an OBGYN in Seattle, and she met Bill Gates. Jeffrey Epstein offered to buy her this beautiful glass house on an island. she knew a lot of the tech pros. She was at Starbucks when it opened, but this was before all these people. We realized that all these people, what they were up to and what they became, and they're probably also mind control victims themselves, most of them. But so she's had just an incredibly fascinating life.
And I just wanted to chime in as well as, like what we have been saying here, the connections with all of these things from the tech industry, aerospace, government, healthcare, religious institutions, the Mormons, Scientology, all the process church that Dana talks about on Rotting Jewels all the time. And this was a huge point of contention for her, is that Tom O'Neill did not make the connection or discuss chaos or the process in chaos. But back to Candy Jones, and I wanted to say that this is a really important piece that I know a lot of us know this, but with the way that they have been able to hack the human brain with like the light colors, the flash rate of our screens, all of these types of things has been studied. So there's not only from that aspect of it, but Hollywood is absolutely a key to this. So not only from the propaganda to really just hacking your attention span in general, but the connections that Hollywood have with politics. So we're talking about Candy Jones. Then we know that we have Marilyn Monroe, right? We know that she died under suspicious circumstances. There's a lot of people that say that Marilyn was, that she was killed and that she was working with the Kennedys and who knows who else, and that she was used as maybe a courier, maybe an information gatherer in whatever way. And certainly she had some, perhaps some symptoms of somebody who had been through something like this. And then we had people like Frank Sinatra. So, and her connection to him, and Frank Sinatra supposedly was also connected to Mia Farrow, and supposedly Mia Farrow's son, Ronan Farrow, is actually the son of Frank Sinatra, as opposed to the official story, which is that it's Woody Harrelson. Who cares, you say? Well, Ronan Farrow happened to be the reporter that broke the entire story for the Me Too movement. So all of this is still actively involved and important and in your life today, whether or not you care about it or believe it or not. It is out there and it's being told to, other people. So the entire Me Too thing. And we know that people involved in Hollywood are often involved in these scandals against children, which once again ties into something that what had happened to Dr. Engel and what had happened to a lot of the people that are talked about in PTK. So there's so many tie-ins through essentially every industry that the regular average person is exposed to. And I wanted to go to Deb really quick before we move on and get Deb's thoughts.
Yes, that is the thing that I'm finding is, like you said, the connections, they're so extreme. And like you had mentioned before, and I've heard people in the chat say too, and I think Jason mentioned something, it's not just about, just the drug component of it. It's social. And, it's all of these things. It's physical. It's the air, the water, the everything, the sounds, everything that we've had in our life. Karen and I talked a little bit about the just the tone of the big three TV stations when we were little. It's like, NBC, ABC, CBS, and it's like do, they would put you in a trance, they would get your attention, they would tell you, impart and download that information. And to me, if they impart, it's an impartation, and it's a spell. It's like spelling, witchcraft, channel, they're channeling, it's programming, and we've been programmed our whole lives and we haven't really even known it. And they play a lot with the frequencies, the tones, and all of these things that were unknown to us and you have to come out of. And they don't like that because they like to actually pick on the people that are the least resistant to it. So they find people that can't fight back, you don't have the means, the finances, that's why they would go into these areas like the mental institutions, hospitals, the prisons is a huge component. They've done so much damage to these people with foods and experiments. And, they had a whole like toxoplasmosis study on prisoners, and they just use them also, feeling it's like, you don't have any rights. You don't have, your life when you're in there. But it's just, it's really sad. But I just think one of the things when I was listening to this Bryce Taylor, or her real name is Susan Ford. That was her, Bryce Taylor, I think, was her name that she'd used as a cover name. But when she was going through this presentation at just like I think a hotel or something, she was giving a presentation to people. She actually had sympathy and compassion for her parents, for her handlers, for other people, because she said, I was part of the programming of my children, of people around me. And so I would like that grace. I would like that. And only actually through prayer, she, got this through prayer, and said that, in one of the groups that she was attending, to help her remember these suppressed memories, that somebody, they'd always say a prayer before they started, and they asked if, dear Lord, please help one of us, you know, heal from this enough so that she can, or, they can help us all. And she said, I knew at that moment that it was me, and I was going to help people. But she still has compassion for these people. And like Karen, I know, has listened to Kathy O'Brien, which I never did, because I don't know. I just thought that, I didn't really trust her. I didn't watch her. I just didn't really care about it. So, but now going back and looking at this, if these people can come out of this and have compassion for other people after all of the horrific things that, they've committed, it's wonderful that people can get help, and, and can heal from this too. I mean, I don't know if ever 100% they would do that. I just can't even imagine. But one component I was just going to say is a person, this John C. Lilly that I looked into, he was like an animal behaviorist. And he's the one who
Albert Burla.
You're right. And then the communications with dolphins, though, that ties into a lot of these things in the sonar. But he created the first sensory deprivation tank. And then the MK Ultra scientists rather hijacked it. And it's like they commissioned, they say they commission it. But of course, he got paid for these things. But then he created one, the ones that they use to this day. And so people could experience their acid trips or other abuse without the stimuli from the outside world. But this ties into some of these documentaries and series like Stranger Things and Project Montauk. And it's supposed to be rather a, like a fictitious thing based on some truths, half truths, a little leaven you throw in there. But these things are actually real. And so they bring them out just enough. And I never watched that. I think, some of our kids watched it, and they're like, Mom, you'd probably really like this because it's like about Project Montauk. And it's like, okay, I've got to watch it. So Brian and I watched the whole series, and we watch movies and things to pick things out to, I think it was like when Travis Knight was talking about watching a movie with his wife, and she's like, are we going to get through this? Or are you just going to pick it apart? It's like, look at this. There's a symbol, there's a hexagon, hive mind, which, also ties back into, like Bryce Taylor saying that it was about being worker bees, and you're to serve the elite, you're a slavery force and a hive mind. And they use this, she said, targeted frequencies, energy brainwaves, satellites, and they only want people to think to a certain level, and that's their goal now. That is what they want worldwide, is just people to get to a certain level. And the ones that go beyond that and can think for themselves are the targets. And that's who they really want to focus on. So that's just a few of my thoughts.
I have testimony from Juliet Engel about the sheep, which is my hive mind, and the goats, which are the mind control people. And then she wants to be an individual and think for herself and not be a member of the sheep or the goats. And she goes into great detail about these things. She also goes into great detail about Laurel Canyon, of course, which we won't get to today. We won't have time for that. But she also talks about the church committee, which was in 1976. There were hearings on MK Ultra Frank Church, and most of the documents were destroyed. And she talks about the importance of the SES, which is the Senior Executive Service, which was set up. And this is a level of military grade executives that are beyond the control and the knowledge of the government, basically. Nobody, and Phil McConnell, who was a member of Able Danger, used to talk about this many, many years ago about the Senior Executive Service and how Hillary Clinton was a member of the Senior Executive Service. There's a book called the Plum Book, which is very difficult to get a hold of, that lists the members of the Senior Executive Service. These people cannot be fired. And Juliet Engel feels these are the people that are running the government at this point. That's why Trump can't do, so many people can't fire the people that are betraying them, the members of the FBI or other people, because they're members of the Senior Executive Service and they're exempt from these things. They make huge amounts of money and they cannot be fired. So she, in all of her interviews, she tries to bring attention to the Senior Executive Service. And I've only heard 2 other podcasts mention the Senior Executive Service over the years. One is American Intelligence Media, which I know you have issues with, Deb, and so do I, but they do talk about the SES. And then the other one was Field McConnell with Able Danger. And nobody else talks about the SES, but I think that we need to look into that and talk about that. And then also Gray Area. Gray has a video I wanted to hopefully close with at some point that talks about where we're moving with this and the hive mind and moving into AI control. Moving this control structure, which was very messy. That's what all this experimentation, it was to figure out ways to control us and to use us. And now he feels that we're moving away from this subversive control to a more overt control, not overt, but more universal and electronic with the AI and other frequency measures.
And before we get to the next thing that you want to share, Karen, what I wanted to also mention is that in speaking about how we see little blips of what was actually done. So, for example, Project Montauk and Stranger Things and the use of sensory deprivation. And, you kind of are tying in this supernatural element. And we do see that this young girl is dehumanized, that she is trapped essentially in this research laboratory with other children, and they're only referred to by their number, and basically they're being studied to see what they can do, what sort of psychic abilities do they have. And I believe that a huge part of the purpose of Hollywood is to do that. So like what I have kind of been thinking about and talking about on this show is when we're exposed to information, even if we don't agree with it or even if we don't subscribe to it, whatever that may be, I still think that it can be influential on us, even planting that seed or even subtly being able to get you to dismiss something. And I certainly believe that this is something that they have figured out with all of the studies that they've done on human behavior, and certainly with all the data that they're able to gather at this point. And they watch, they're tracking the information dissemination flow and things like that. So I think that a lot of times these subjects are touched on in Hollywood in order for people to say, oh yeah, I know about that. And then they gloss over it. So this prevents you from actually digging into the truth of the situation and perhaps even believing it at all because you saw it in a movie. So I think that it goes to discredit and familiarize a person on that subject at the same time. Any thoughts on that, guys?
I was just going to say that when Karen mentioned, like the church committee and also the Rockefeller Commission, those were 2 things going on simultaneously, that spawned from the investigation of these these files coming out. But of course, they had to destroy these, to try to eradicate conspiracies within the organization because it wasn't, faring well for them. But a lot of this too ties back to it goes Watergate. I mean, they can tie in so many of these, and the presidents and, all of these people. It's like, and the Dulles brothers, right? The Contra and all of these, episodes that have happened. But so many of these presidents were named that these people were sold to, or I think it was Bryce Taylor who named a lot of them. And it was anywhere.
Also Kathy O'Brien.
Right. And see, I'd have to get into some of her stuff more, but it was like everyone thinks Reagan was wonderful. No, he was one of these participants.
She wrote a book, a long book, The Transformation of America. It was really the first detailed information that came out, I think, Kathy O'Brien.
Right. And then she probably named some of these people, but it's
A
like
lot.
they use these. It's like Reagan and Bush and even JFK, which people always want to, prop him up. And actually, Kennedy too. They want these people to be their Camelots and knight in shining army, but or armor, but they're really not. They are still involved in this. They are still, guilty of these crimes. And like they said, some of these people owned them. They were, sold out to these people. And it ties into so many of these, the commissions, because like Gerald Ford ties back into the, Frank Olson murder, because he was trying to cover up some of the aftermath of, Frank Olson's death by inviting his, widow and children to the White House. And then we'll give you $750,000 to keep you quiet and not go any further, because they did not, want this exposed, especially about the biological and chemical agents that he was dispersing and using upon these populations for decades. And Frank Olson came to, a little bit of a wake up moment, and was feeling guilty about some of this. So they took him on a CIA field trip to a lake, and, and then programmed him, gave him LSD. They gave him these, components to see how they could handle him. And then, his handler, had him jump out a window, and they said he committed suicide. Well, his children had his body exhumed. They exhumed the body of Frank Olson in 1994 and found that he had blunt force trauma to his head and to his chest. And so they went on to keep doing this. And one of his sons, to this day is still investigating this, not finding all the answers. But that's Ford, who isn't a wonderful person. I mean, none of these people are. So I always say, most people are like, Deb, who do you trust? You don't trust anyone. I'm like, I really don't. I'm like very skeptical. But I said, if you know their name, they're in the game. If they are in politics, and, like I said, they could have been victims of this. I believe many were, and they have to be, to carry out some of these, just awful things that they've been part of. So
Absolutely. And we have to keep in mind that these, as far as these high up politicians, that especially with JFK, we know that he had problems with Alan Dulles as the director of the CIA, but he still knew about what the CIA was up to. And he allowed that to happen. And these people are intimately involved in all of these things. And then we got, after Alan Dulles, and we had William Colby. And then William Colby was one of the people that was still in play whenever the Franklin scandal, which of course connects to the Bush and the Reagan era, he was part of making sure that story got brushed under the rug. So it absolutely is a very intricately woven thread. But the people in politics, whether you love them as a JFK or whether you simply know them well, a lot of people remember Reagan fondly. But these people were involved in this milieu, and they were, now how much power a president actually has, that's a whole other question. But they were operating with the CIA. That was on their watch when these things happened. And this was as well as when JFK was president, he had to give the green light to move into Vietnam, and he did. Now, it was sold to him as a limited war, but the point is that happened, and there was no good reason for that to happen under his watch. So there's many of these instances where these people are absolutely involved, even if people have a positive view of them in from a political standpoint.
that is true. And also that ties back to like Laurel Canyon. So there is that huge component, because the Doors and Jim Morrison's dad was the one who was complicit in the Gulf of Tonkin, that
That's
whole
it.
false flag. And it's like, so there's another, a little connection, that they just have their little spikes all over. So you can't unconnect any of these pieces.
I have a
That was
whole
it.
interview about Laurel Canyon time-stamped I wanted to go through, but we won't do that. But yeah, it's pretty obvious if you can go through the Laurel Canyon story, the way that the hippie scene was created. Vito Polakis he owned Juliet Engel. He owned the group of kids that were the honey traps. And that played right in with the Young Turks, which is Warren Beatty. Marilyn Monroe was at Lookout Mountain, which is one of the things Dave McGowan brought Lookout Mountain to the fore. Lookout Mountain was a military film studio installation that was 100,000 square feet. And Juliet Engel actually said that there were Nazi memorabilia there when she went there in the 50s. There was Nazi memorabilia, and that's where they filmed snuff films. And the Nazi memorabilia was also in her house because 5 of her uncles were in the OSS. And so she Henry Fonda, the Fonda twins, and with the Young Turks, the Fondas, Bruce Dern was highly tied in with the Bloodlines, and all of these. So, of course, Dave McGowan with all of the music, basically people from the '60s, and so many of the actors from the '60s, but also '70s, but also going back into time that were at Lookout Mountain. So it's a great way to look into all of this and see how it's all connected. Absolutely. The way that messaging is done, distraction is done, the cultural maneuvering of all of us, cues, frequencies, the change in the key and the music, so many of these things, all the Brady Bunch, the Monkees, the Beatles, all of these great memories, the foods even that we all became, the space program. And that's another thing that Gray goes to. Gray goes into the space program, and he thinks, and he says, and Juliet Engel also ties it in, that when you take a child, you take them away from safety, you traumatize them, you drug them potentially, and then they wake up in another place. They don't know if they're on the moon. They don't know if it's an alien or somebody in a costume. So he feels that a lot of the disclosure movement is being controlled, which absolutely I believe it is. We know about Carol Rosin and the 3 world wars and a fake alien invasion, Operation Bluebeam, and all those types of things. But he feels that more people need to talk about disclosure and the way that these operations, these mind control operations, have one thing that they can do is use the fake alien, make people believe that they've been manipulated by aliens, abducted by aliens. And so that's another thing that he also talks about.
Right, like the War of the Worlds, and they just did a remake. It's like these people that was trauma-based mind control, actually, when you think about it. It isn't anything apart from that. So, but that is like the Lookout Mountain. Well, Charles Manson, the whole thing, we
He was
discussed a
the
little
big
bit of
player in
that.
that. And Juliet Engel also said she hung out with Charles Manson, that he was one of the background musicians.
Right. Well, and they actually have him as being an undocumented participant, but suspected in MK Ultra. But I mean, it's almost obvious. But like I said, there was a little component because the prosecutor who did that trial, Vincent Bugliosi, he was born and raised for most of his life in the town that I was born in. It's kind of a weird connection, Hibbing, Minnesota, and that's where he was from. But like I said, that's where Bob Dylan was from, and the connections I had there with, Bob Dylan's grandma, or his mother, and, she bought us gifts and was right there. And I think I look back on all these things and I'm like, what a strange thing. Why did all these things happen? But it ties into these, and it's like Manson and the tunnel systems that they said, a lot of these victims under Laurel Canyon in that whole area, that it was like the tunnels, and they moved them, and that's how they got around these. But there are a lot of these victims that, I looked into a long time ago, like Fiona Barnett, we mentioned her from Australia, and just the horrific things she experienced. But everywhere around the world, these people have the same experiences, the same triggers. And like Bryce Taylor mentioned, she said in some of her, speaking with her therapist, she said, why don't people believe children? It's not like these children made these things up when they are taken, when they are 4 or 6 years old, like J.R. Sweet. He said, you're just innocent. It's stolen from you, but you can't make this up. I mean, you cannot create these things in your mind. Children have great imaginations, but it just is beyond, this realm. And so it's like, she never could understand why children would not be believed. So it's even evident in children, just, like with abuse, or pedophilia and things that happen, especially within a family. But most often they've shown that it is your parents, your grandparents, the people close to you that have done this. So that is just, you know, a really traumatic thing.
I was on a 3-week jury of a baby that a 3-year-old that was killed by his mother's boyfriend, and I decided when I was on the jury that yes, I was going to listen to the little boy who said that this man did it. So we did find him guilty, but you're right. So often people don't believe the children.
And they're the victims.
Mhm. I know
Absolutely.
Ashley wanted
And
to wrap things up about 2 o'clock, and I'm really not starting to feel well.
yeah,
know.
well, and we can certainly start to wind things down. One thing that I wanted to add is that absolutely, I think that we've made so many connections here, and it's certainly worth us trying to revisit and maybe even dedicating an entire show to Laurel Canyon or to, you know, whatever, because these topics are so broad. There's so much to say. But in one of the things that we talked about is the idea that this is being used on us as a weapon and worldwide, and we tied in with COVID. And one of the things that I wanted to read from here is this ritual abuse in 21st century, talking about that, because this is part of the discussion here is the worldwide threat. So it's essentially the worldwide portation of Gladio or even Phoenix in some ways. So systematic threats of terrorist attacks on the world's population are for the purpose of mind control. The media report that there are threats, and the alerts go to code yellow, orange, and red. This ties back in with the colors that we were talking about, that we have these associations and well ingrained associations. The audience has no way of knowing what is real. The result is that at the microcosmic level, a fear of annihilation is activated and looms in the heart and soul of each person. So, for example, the threat of nuclear bombs and the experience of the bombing in Hiroshima that closed the Second World War were frightening enough to shake the very foundations of psychological health for many people. So I do think that ultimately, not only is it about controlling behavior through figuring out how to hack human behavior, but in order to keep us fearful. And this is always how they will set up the Hegelian dialectic. You know, the problem, reaction, solution. So the problem, of course, is whatever you're afraid of, then whatever you're afraid of happens. And then we have the solution, which is ultimately less say over your own life and less personal freedom. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about in regards to Laurel Canyon is the that Deb had brought up the tunnels, and we talked about the tunnels here. This is also well talked about in PTK, because this is something that was supposedly controversial about the McMartin preschool and the Presidio, and how these children were being taken to wherever they were being abused. And then it has come out that these tunnels were in fact valid, that these children were telling the truth. And then that ties back in with what these guys are saying, which is that the children and what their testimony is and what they're telling us is very, very important. So before we do close it down, I just want to go back to Deb and then Karen for any last thoughts. We'll try to pick this up again and get into more detail, and then we'll shout out the chat and we will wrap it up.
Okay, well, one of the things about the color coding, and that brought me to 9/11 or Lie 11, as we like to call it, and Patriot Act. And then we have these, you know, it's a red alert, it's yellow, it's like we're in danger, there's a threat. So they're always using that. And it ties back to me to the Cold War, because like you said, you can't see most of those attacks, or the enemy is, you know, under the radar so much. And but the subliminal effect that has on people, to always keep them in this hyper aware, this sense of fear, terror, you're a terrorist, or you know, somebody's attacking you. So the colors tie in, and you know, the threats of these things, it, you know, it kind of goes pretty deep with that. But just the fact too that all of these people, you know, they try to cover it up and not make it valid, but then sometimes they're the ones who come out and have to, you know, admit some of it. So they let things sneak out, or let's, you know, like talk about the alien invasion, and let's, you know, keep that fear going. There's always part of the, you know, puzzle. But I believe it's been planned out so many things in advance that we're just waiting for the next shoe to drop, and or the next disease. Like I'm still waiting for Operation Dark Winter, and some of these that they still, you know, are really prevalent in their arsenal, their agenda, you know, of crimes and against humanity. So, but like you said, just all of these things that tie together, and we'll have to unweave some of those and like you said, concentrate on one subject and pick it apart.
Absolutely. Thank you, Deb. I have really, really been glad to have you here today. You've had a lot of really amazing input for us and education and adding into the conversation so much. So thank you very much. Karen.
Oh, thank you guys.
Yeah, it's been great to see everybody here today. There's so much else I wanted to get to, but it's not going any away. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. So maybe someday we can do that. And I really work to try to lay out a story that would cover so much of this. So maybe some other time we can do that. And it's so great to see everybody in the chat, and prayers for everybody who's struggling out there and all the creatures, the ostriches that are lost their battle with the courts. However you feel about that, it's still not a good thing. And I just hope that everybody takes care of yourself and enjoys the fall season. It's been great to see everybody today. Thank you for the donation. Was that from Skunk Hollow that we got?
Yes, it
a
was.
donation? So thank you so much for that. And Jason, I hope that you enjoy your visit with your mother. And Deb, it's just been wonderful having you. And it was so wonderful to speak with you the other night.
Oh, it was. I'm glad we got to connect. And thank you, ladies, for having me. I was a little nervous and never done this before, but thank you for all the help. And it was a great experience.
You did a wonderful job.
So happy to have you. Okay, I'm going to head to the chat. So to kick us off, we had our own Jason Barker out of town visiting with his mother. So, hey, Jason, we had iHandy. We had LT Oracle of Truth. We had Levi, Narrow Way, Narrow Gate, Sweets, Providence Wins, Ann Christ. Hi, Ann. Glad to catch you live. Ronnie Omelets, Dustin Helm. We had, I believe that's Beverly or BRLY338. Jason's mom joined us in the chat briefly. Right. So hello. Hello. Yes. We had Carl and Hanny. We had Ricky from Anything Is Possible. We had Billy Ray Valentine. We had Radio Sack. We had our friend Doc Spoiler. We had our buddy Geesebusters. We had Neurodivergent One. We had Misfit 1904. Tom. Hi, Tom. We had Salcedo Paranormal. Hello. The Algorithm. Nostradamus, Skunk Hollow Rose Gardens. And again, that donation, we had Patrick Dad Guy, and we had Foggy, aka Hiker. So thank you all so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you for sharing. I know that Sweets was, like shares our stuff, and we had some new people join us in the chat because of that. And we really appreciate you being here, taking your time, all of your input in the comments after the fact, your likes to help support the show, your monetary donations, your commentary in the chat is all very helpful, encouraging, educating, edifying, all of those things. So we really appreciate that. Again, thank you so much, Deb, for being here. I know it is kind of unnerving and a little bit scary, but it was really great having you here, and we'll have to do this all again. And I do want to also encourage everyone to please like the show. Feel free to leave us comments. Feel free to reach out to us. We enjoy hearing from you, and make sure that you are subscribed. And if you have anybody that would be interested in our episodes or our work, please feel free to share that with them as well. And until next time, we will look forward to seeing you all again soon. Karen, I hope you feel very, very much better, and we'll talk to you all later.
Keep your sword sharp and your armor tight.
What she said. Okay. Thank you.
Through the thunder we move unseen, shattering walls where the guilty convene. Our banner is truth, our shield is our light. We wage a war against the endless night.